Right.
Hi, it's Monday, it's 3 o'clock, and welcome to Together Unlocked, brought to you by Together 2012 from East London and the West Midlands. I just thought that's very convenient, isn't it? East meets West, and as we like to say, London 2012 meets Birmingham 2022, because Together 2012 is an organisation led by disabled artists and set up after the success of our 2012 festival to continue and create a real and genuine lasting legacy for the Paralympics. And I think our name and everything we do has never been more relevant. So we're running this live stream from 3 to 4 o'clock, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for as long as we're shielding. I'm Ju Gosling. I'm an artist and artistic director of Together 2012. With me is Julie Newman, who's an artist and our chair. We'll come back and do a bit of audio description in a minute, but first of all, over to the West Midlands.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, I'm Robin Surgener, Business Director of Together 2012, um, artist under the name of Angry Fish. Nearly forgot who I was then, and one of the co-hosts of Together Unlocked. I will go describing myself. For our regular viewers, you'll be astonished to notice that I am in fact clean, shiny, sparkly, and shaven. Um, Not quite sure why, but there you go. Maybe it's one of those quirks of lockdown. So I have very well kempt, but ever so slightly long silver grey hair, no rimmed glasses, um, and I am sporting a black t-shirt, which is from the 2013, I think, Punk and Ska Weekender at Butlins Minehead, which was a jolly good show.
I am Josh Surgener. I'm a PhD researcher and host of Together TV, and I have progressively longer blonde hair. There's kind of gone through mullet phase into now just partly at the front and the back. I'm currently wearing a blue t-shirt.
Lovely. So I've got short red hair, hennaed hair, I should say. olive skin, black rimmed glasses, and a purple t-shirt. It says Mad Love, which I thought was good for one of the things we're going to be discussing today, which is this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. I've also got my hands in splints. I have silver star stud earrings, and I'm not sure if anyone can see it, but I have a necklace which is a sort of, I don't know what kind of stone it is. It's not moonstone, but it's quite a pale stone in the shape of a whale's tail. And you, Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Newman. I currently have no hair today on account of I'm having a really bad hair day. So I put a hat on. I've got a little olive green hat on my head. It's got a, what do you call this thing, Ju?
Baseball
It's a baseball cap.
cap.
Oh, yes. I did know that. I've got dark rimmed glasses. I'm wearing a black t shirt and a big smile.
And behind us, we have a little bit you can see of our wonderful Together 2012 graffiti banner. And that has images of all of the different things that we do as an organisation: theatre, dance, film, music, visual art, street art, carnival art, crafts. Probably other things that I've completely forgotten. And we have some representations of all of that behind us. Yes, film, photography, and indeed, behind us as well, we have Ned the Norwich Teddy sporting,
Oh, yes.
sporting a gold medal. If you haven't watched the show on Wednesdays before, the Surgeoners claim to be the most competitive family in the world. And as they can't get on with the usual weekly dose of para sports, which I imagine runs into dozens and hundreds of hours every month, teaching and coaching and taking part, instead we race top clockwork toys for the right of one of our teddies to wear a medal, and we stick our teddies up each time because we're also taking part in the worldwide virtual bear hunt. If you're able to go out for exercise, you may have noticed different teddy bears in the window for children to spot. We're not able to go out because we're all shielding, so we have virtual bear hunt for any young person who is shielding as well, and indeed any older person like myself who still quite likes to have a teddy bear. Do you still quite like to have a teddy bear, Julie?
No, not really.
She's lying, of course. I'm not entirely convinced the Surgeoners are quite so keen because they keep putting up the same teddy bear to compete, but I think they just need it to get a medal. Is that right?
It's just until they win. If they lose, they have to come back and repeatedly try until they succeed, and then they can retire.
Although some of these results are going to be going to the court for arbitration in sport.
Yes, well, I think we actually worked out that you were the ones that were cheating last time, but never mind. I think, Josh, we might have your microphone turned up a bit louder, if only so you could contradict your father.
Hold on a
So,
minute.
third,
One sec.
this is Mental Health Awareness Week. Mental Health Awareness Week this year has the theme of kindness. I believe it was intended to have another theme, but they have changed it. And I was looking at their website, which I have to say is not terribly well designed if you want to be able to read it. And let me just hand you my mic 1 second, Julie. Yes, here is the definition of kindness. It has been proposed that kindness has 3 main facets, and I think in human terms they mean 3 main aspects or sides to it. Considering the feelings of other people, having everyday acceptance, courtesy, and love towards others, and behaving honourably towards them. And I thought that was a really interesting definition of kindness, because when I first heard about this week and heard about the theme, I thought, well, what do they mean? Because you have all these people that are going, oh, we're just doing it to be kind, when actually it's completely the opposite. But I thought that was quite a good definition. What would you how would you define being kind?
I mean, I think that there's one actually fundamental facet missing in that list, giving its Mental Health Awareness Week, and that's self-kindness, which kind of all of those things come under, but that's kind of giving a very outward perspective of what kindness is. And yeah, in this week we do need to consider how we treat ourselves that enables us to treat others with kindness. I mean, yeah, I mean, I get your question, and I think a lot of us who've been activists, the thought of kindness, brings up models of charity and helplessness and the needing to be mended and helped without question and that kind of thing. Probably that's our interpretations within our kind of the realms that we live and work in as disability artists, disabled artists, and disability rights activists. I guess those people who are considering themselves to be kind at the point of making that decision are thinking about doing something for someone else without necessarily recognizing the relationship that might have been born out of. So what I mean by that is, if they're doing it from a rich family to a poor family, they're not going, it's because I'm rich and they're not and I'm better than them. It's going, we've got something that they haven't, so we can help them, and aren't necessarily taking that kind of idea of one person being more able or more capable of financial assistance or financial living than another one. And I guess at this point it's probably maybe that immediate perception of kindness is one we got to at least kind of bring to bear into this time.
And I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and we're going to keep talking about this throughout the show. But I just wanted to pick up that thing about self kindness, because I think it's also hard to be kind to others if you're not being kind to yourself. Certainly burnout is going to, as they say, is going to happen very fast. What do you think a definition of kindness is, Julie?
I think for me, it's about putting somebody else before yourself, and doing that from an authentic perspective, not sort of like from patriarchal benevolence, sort of like from rich people to poor people or anything like that, but just sometimes your heart just goes out to somebody, and you really feel for them, and it doesn't take much to smile, or it doesn't take much to say hello, good morning, or to be pleased to see them, and that can sometimes just create a little wave, and sort of it builds up during the course of the day to other people that we don't know anything about. It's like somebody many, many years ago told me, if you drop a pebble into a pond, you never see necessarily where the ripples go, but the ripples are still there.
Yes, and in fact, there's a lot of research on the Mental Health Awareness Week's website that says exactly that one kind act just ripples through. And there's all sorts of research to show that that's actually really true. That kind of person smiling at you and saying hello in the morning makes you kind of motivated to go on to be nice to somebody else, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure it always works like that, but that's certainly what the research shows. Did you have any thoughts about widening their definition of being kind?
I think something that Robin said earlier is really important to think about as well, and that comes from respect. If I truly respect somebody, do I want to patronize them? No, I don't. If I feel empathic towards somebody, that that involves a respect for them as another human, the human being in their own right, and it's not about how much money they've got, what they look like, or whether they're disabled or not. It's about it's an equal response to somebody on an equal basis, and I think I think Robin's absolutely spot on. I think as a movement we got terribly, terribly cross about people being kind to us, and that whole piss on pity movement that came about quite a long time ago now. It feels like yesterday.
Yes, no one's been kind for a long time, have they?
But, yeah, but sort of like, who wants to be the recipient of benevolence? Sometimes it's quite nice, but mostly it's not, and it's about being patronised, and it's not. That's not equal.
No, so we want to add self kindness and respect. And I think before we come to Josh, that concept of the Mental Capacity Act, I think with older and disabled people in particular, is often really important, that people make decisions for other people on the basis that they think they're being kind. but they're not really respecting their rights under the Mental Capacity Act, which says if you're able to make a choice, you should be allowed to make a choice. So, for example, you can choose which clothes are going to be bought for you and which clothes you're going to wear that particular day. You might still not be able to handle your money. But I think we see a lot of, indeed, perfectly able adults with no access to their money also then being given no say because their decision making isn't respected. So somebody thinks they're being kind by going and doing everything on their behalf, but they're not really, because I think once you're undermined, that's so bad for your mental health. And I think when I was thinking about the real pressures on mental health at the moment, but also longer term as a disabled person, for me, it's always when I'm being asked to do the impossible. You have to make a phone call. Well, actually, I can't speak on the phone unless I can see somebody's face. You have to send a letter. Well, I haven't been able to get to the post office on my own for 20 years, and I just don't have enough social care support very often to send somebody to the post office. And it's those kind of when you're being asked to do the impossible. But again, I think this definition is about considering feelings, but it's not really considering circumstances. Anyway, Josh, what did you think about the theme of kindness, particularly in terms of young people?
I think, I mean, trying to not kind of repeat what's already been said, but the idea that kindness is, or true kindness is a selfless act. You're not doing it to make yourself feel better, or it's not. It doesn't come from a place of pity. It is just a purely, you know, this is going to make somebody else feel better or brighten somebody's day or your own day. If that kind of self-care concept, I think, is really, really important, and it's something kind of outside of disability. But as a kind of PhD student, it gets kind of not hammered into us, but kind of hammered into us quite a lot, the importance of looking out for each other, but monitoring our own kind of mental health as well. It's very easy when you're working by yourself to just sit at home on a computer for 3 years and never see anybody and kind of spiral down a little bit because it's just you in a library. So we always kind of really, really focus, and it's become even more kind of in the times at the moment that we're watching out for each other and just dropping a message. How are you? What are you up to? And just being kind to each other to try and help each other through.
And I was going to add, I don't think that kindness isn't about grandiose gestures. It really is about asking someone if they need help to do something, not assuming.
Sorry, Robin. I think that's something the Mental Health Awareness Week is really promoting. They want people to do small acts of kindness, and small acts is all it takes. I'm wondering whether the opposite is also true. Something else they said on the website is one model of compassion suggests that if we do not believe that someone is deserving of help, then we may feel anger or shame instead of compassion. And alternatively, if we do not feel we have the resources to cope or help, then we may feel anxiety, distress, or fear. And I think lots of us who've had to deal with adult services and the benefit system have experienced a great deal of unkindness. And I think some of that is absolutely linked to what this first thing was saying, that the kind of demonizing of disabled people, in particular those with mental health difficulties, as people who were just lazy and scroungers and couldn't be bothered to go to work, and they were just living off the state. And then you go somewhere and you say, well, look, I'm a disabled person, I'm really vulnerable in these particular ways, so I need you to change the way you deliver the service. And what you actually get is a kind of anger and disgust and kind of nastiness, and all of the information that you've given to show why you're vulnerable is then used against you. But I think also the anxiety and fear and distress, again, if you're asking a council officer who doesn't have the resources and doesn't have the support, then that anxiety, fear and distress is also going to feel pretty unkind if you're the recipient.
I was going to say, I mean, kind of adding to that, I think is that a lot of the unkindness or anger or frustrations that can be, we can experience is when the situation that someone is being deemed as a choice. Addiction, for example. Well, it's your choice if you drink too much. Well, a lot of the time people with addictions, for example, are victims of domestic situations, victims of drug pushers, victims of capitalism, whatever they are. And yet, when they look for help, it's like, well, you've got yourself into this. Why should we help you? And it's astonishing. I can tell you the amount of times that, people are like, well, can't you just go and walk somewhere, go and do this, as if they're living this way is a choice that we've made.
I think that's such an important point, and I wanted to pick up that yesterday was what's quaintly now known as Ida Hobbit, which is the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersex phobia, Transphobia. And they did a lovely campaign a few years ago that Julie and I were part of, which was simply holding hands, and being seen to hold hands in public, which is still something for same-sex couples that is fraught with danger and difficulty. But that's a slight transgression. But what I wanted to say is people are becoming more and more aware that in what we're known as the LGBTQI plus community, which is lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, transgender and intersex people, and everybody else. We have as many as 1 in 3 of our community is disabled, and that's compared to maybe 1 in 4 or 5 of the general British public. I think it was 1 in 5, but as people are getting older, it's getting closer to 1 in 4, isn't it? And that unkindness and impact on mental health, and then pushing things like addiction, it's very, very common for people to have effectively, sadly, long term mental health difficulties by the time they've left school or left home, which might well be earlier than other people would have done because they're not getting on with their families. And that can turn into, well, the only places to go and meet other people like you are venues that sell alcohol. Then you feel anxious and stressed and isolated because of going into a room full of strangers. People have a drink, then they have another drink. That can spiral on later in life to kidney problems, high blood pressure. And again, it's seen as a choice. I think one of the reasons that LGBTQI plus disabled people in particular are really dependent on social services is that families often think that you've made a lifestyle choice, not that you are who you are and you're sort of getting on with your life as the kind of authentic person that you are, but somehow it's a choice. And therefore, if you have some difficulties, well, if you just made different choices. And again, it's that sort of what I was talking about earlier in terms of challenges to mental health when you're asked to do the impossible. You are who you are, and I think anybody would agree that if you try and be who you're not, that's really, really bad for mental health.
And I was going to add to that. I mean, just the statistic about 1 in whatever those statistics were,
1 in 3 and 1 in 4,
is actually it's probably equal, but that people who aren't living in our sorts of circumstances, are trying to make their way in the world where white, rich, tall male is the dominant, is actually they don't feel in a position that they can actually identify with who they may well be, because for the fear of what will happen to them in a so-called productive contributory way, whereas there are lots of disabled people who, because of all those other things that would seem negative, actually are in a position where they are able to be more comfortable with being their true selves.
I think that's true. I think you have to go through a long journey of self acceptance yes, I think when you sort of realize that actually it's perfectly normal to be disabled, it's actually nothing. There's nothing normal about being permanently happy. I mean, I think there's probably a kind of psychiatric term for that. Nobody guarantees us happiness, but we can be sad and miserable and still have relatively good mental health, if that doesn't sound too contradictory.
I think I just wanted to say as well, I think one of the things which really shocks me regularly actually is how unkind people are on Twitter and social media. I think there's a sometimes a culture of judgmentalism which is appalling. You know, sort of terrible things are said about people, and it's done, you know, in the security that, oh, it, you know, it doesn't really matter. I'm anonymous. You know, I'm just a Twitter handle, and I can put this person down, and terrible things about how people look, what they can and can't do, and massive judgments which are completely inappropriate.
And I think if you're the member of a marginalised group in lockdown at the moment, seeing those things, I mean, when you were saying about people being able to be themselves, of course, for a lot of disabled LGBTQI plus people, people have had to be either permanently dependent on their families or dependent on their families at the moment because they can't get social care. And there seem to be sort of lots of reports of people having to go back into the closet, people dressing, you know, trans people having to dress as a gender that they don't really have anything in common with and is really traumatizing for them, but it's the only way they're allowed to be at home and to have a roof over their head. You know, I think all of those pressures are really worse if you then are in a community where you see very homophobic Twitters or indeed very nasty Twitters about any kind of group that you might identify with.
Just sorry, just to finish off from my perspective on that, read the Twitter thing. What I've noticed is how many people are actually saying they dread anything happening to them because perhaps if somebody's trans and they are suddenly buried as the opposite to how they self-identify, so that if a trans woman becomes buried by parents who determine that they have to dress in a suit and be called he, that goes completely against everything that they've established in their life. And also in terms of those of us who are lesbian or gay, you know, having parents who decide that you're not, and cutting out the partner, the long-term partner, from any funeral arrangements, for an example, rather than in, you know, being guided by that partner and guided by their lifestyle.
Yeah, and I mean that's been a decades old problem, but I think again, you know, somebody can be perfectly well at the moment, but that's a real mental health concern if you come from our community, and very much an ongoing one. And I know it was one of my first concerns when COVID came out. You know, was if we both died together, you know, where would we? What would happen to us? Would any of our wishes be followed? Could any of our wishes even be followed, given where we are? But yes, I mean, I think it's really important that sort of sense of for everybody who's dressing up and is all over YouTube in outrageous outfits, you know, there's an awful lot more who are having to kind of, yeah, be somewhere where usually they would spend as little time as possible and they would spend all of the rest of their time in social spaces and workspaces where they could be themselves, and they're really just having to hide. And I again, it's that kind of perennial problem that I know Josh will recognise, which is so many under 35s are still living with family. I mean, I know you only moved back for the duration under duress, but for many
Thank goodness
people,
for that.
but for many people, you know, they're really living lives where they might be grandparents in other circumstances and they're still stuck at home. And I think the mental health stress on families as well. If you've, I mean, tell us how hard it is to be a father of a returning child, Robin.
Oh, actually, before I do that, can we say hello to Blake Jarrett Gibbons, actually, who is saying hello on the feed? So, hi, Blake. Hope you're well. Do you know, I don't think it's it's any more difficult than any other family situation where you've just got more people than you're used to living with. You know, if you've ever been on holiday, and you go with three families, and you know, 16 minutes in, you're wishing you'd actually gone as one family. um, you know, and I don't wish that of Josh at all. And I think it's much more. I mean, you know, very very relevant to what we're talking about is recognizing that we all need our own bit of space, physical and mental space. And you know, I've wobbled over the weekend a little bit, and got across this morning. I can share that. But recognizing it is the important thing. So I think that, having an extra person in the house that you're not used to, who only here every, well, I don't know, seems to come home far too often for a student anyway. But I mean, but on the serious note, one is a family member and we love him and it's great. But it's just about, I think, everybody having those awarenesses that people need to be who they are, and be able to be who they are. And so therefore we've got to kind of deliver that space now, whether that's in the lockdown situation or actually in 3 years time when the world is open fully again. Everyone still needs the space to be who they are, and nobody's they is any more important than anybody else's.
With the slight caveat, as long as they're not doing anybody else any harm.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I think it's important to.
Yeah, I was
Yeah, no,
going
I
to say,
think
you get pinned into this kind of, oh, you're a minority, and you think, yeah, but not all minorities are good. This is, this is just where you put that label on. But yes, I'm very much of the opinion, that as long as somebody's doing no harm to somebody else, they should absolutely be able to do what they want. Anyway, we've got quite a lot of viewers' work being sent in, which is terrific. And I just wanted to play us before we move on slightly, but we will be still talking about Mental Health Awareness Week. This is Steraplergia with Hannah, joining in what I understand was the Gareth Malone Open Choir event, which seemed to have a very good mental health awareness theme. Does anybody know about the Gareth Malone Open Choir?
No,
Sounds
I know
like
who he is, but not that particular.
Sounds like we've all slightly slipped up then. Let's see if we can play this.
You can never know what it's like winter freezes just like ice. Cold lonely light that shines from you. You wonder about the wreck you hide behind that mask you use. Did you know me? Look at me, I'm back again. Taste the love in a simple way. And if you need to know while I'm still standing, just fade away. Don't you know I'm still standing better than I ever did. Looking like a true survivor, feeling like a little kid. I'm still standing after all this time, picking up the pieces of life without you by my side. I'm still standing, yeah. I'm still standing. Yeah. Dude. So good. Yeah. So good.
And you're quite right, Stara and Hannah, that was so good.
Yeah.
And I've been singing it ever since I started playing it this morning in the back of my head. So fortunately, you didn't have to listen to me singing along then. And I also wanted to say hi to Blake Jarrett Gibbons, who was in fact our very first volunteer back in 2012 on the Together 2012 Film Festival, and has been a tower of strength ever since. He was an unofficial apprentice. He's been an Arts Award recipient. So welcome to the audience, Blake. We will have you doing things for the show before another
Definitely.
week is up.
Yeah.
So we wanted to move on and talk a bit about our Join In From Home programme, of which this show is part. Our website is www.together2012.org.uk. And on the main menu, very close to the top, you will see a link, Join In From Home. And that has a huge variety of things to do. So you can listen to playlists, you can watch films and videos of performances, but more to the point, you can join in and make your own work. So we have activities that effectively relate to our outreach program. We have a clubs program, which in usual times we run Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday mornings in East Ham. They're free and open to any disabled person who wants to come and anybody they want to bring with them. And that's where we have a whole variety of different creative arts workshops. On a Monday, we would have Photographers and Filmmakers Club led by Julie on the second Monday, and we would have Dance Club on the fourth Monday. So let's start with some of those activities. In the Join In From Home program for the Photographers and Filmmakers Club, what we've asked you to do is think about making a video on the theme of home. And that could be quite a negative video. I mean, I think when we're talking about Mental Health Awareness Week, it could be about the stresses and strains, or it could be about the pleasures, or it could be about both. It could be a drama, a documentary, a comedy, an animation, anything you can think of on the subject of home. We run our own film festival. Well, we run the UK's only Pan Disability International Disability Film Festival every December. And this time round, there will be a special award for the best film on the theme of home. You don't have to be shielding like us to join in. You certainly don't have to be disabled. And indeed, you don't have to be disabled to submit your film to the Disability Film Festival. But how do you think? I was thinking about this earlier. I mean, we've talked a lot about film and photography on the show over the last few weeks, and particularly what we can do with a smartphone. How do you think it really fits in with mental health and well-being?
Creativity. I'm just going to make note of the fact it's the corporation dust cart behind us. That's what the strange noise is.
Well, hopefully, one of the reasons we're almost sucking these lovely coloured lollipops. For anybody who can't see, Julie has a purple mic and I have a pink one. Is that we hope you won't pick up any of the noise in the background, which now includes 2 assistance dogs shouting at the refuse collectors.
I think just coming back to the making film, making pictures, doing artwork, trying to tune your ukulele, even if it doesn't work. It's about creativity. It's about moving out of yourself. It's engaging a different part of your brain than if you're sitting thinking, reading, or watching the television. Having said watching the television, I think that in itself can inspire a lot of creativity. And I know there's been times over the weekend when I've sung out loud, and that was, accompanying the television. And on one level, that's a bit sad, but on another level, that's actually quite a lot of fun. And there's nobody going to make a judgment on me. But I think the other side is that if we don't find a way to have an outlet for our creativity, we become very, very inward looking. And that leads to a tremendous amount of escalation, an acceleration, a heightening of loneliness and a sense of isolation, and that has to be very, very difficult to manage and difficult to cope with. I know I'm a survivor in mental health difficulties, a long-term survivor, and I know whenever I get a little gremlin of a shadow of the past sneaking into my world, one way to get rid of it is to try and be creative, to do a drawing, to do a spontaneous singing, whistle, playing the whatever musical instrument is at hand. And I think that's where Together really is a tremendous resource, and I think it's a very valuable resource for that purpose.
And I hope you find the resources available online in our Join In From Home program valuable for exactly that reason. What do you think about photography, filmmaking, and mental health, Robin and Josh?
I think kind of similar to what Julie was saying, that having an outlet or a creative outlet is so important. Whether that is as a photographer or a filmmaker, if you are making something, it could be that you're wanting to paint the next kind of Picasso, or you're just kind of really angry and you're not entirely sure why, so grabbing some pens and paper and kind of scrawling down blank shapes or angry notes or whatever. It being able to kind of get those feelings and put it out there, I guess, just so that it kind of sounds cheesy, I guess, but you're not internalizing it by the the process of creating something with it, you are kind of being able to almost release that stress or anxiety or whatever.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't have to be at a professional level. I mean, what we start on the basis with at Together 2012 is everybody's got something to teach and everybody's got something to learn. So the way we run our clubs is we bring people together from across impairment groups, people with mental health difficulties, deaf people, people with long-term health conditions, people with physical impairments, people with learning difficulties, and that's really important to us that it's inclusive of people with learning difficulties. Somebody facilitates who'll be more likely to be a mid-career artist, but we know that everybody's going to learn something in the day, including all of us who are professional, and everybody's going to be able to share something. You absolutely don't have to have done anything creative before to be creative now, and you don't have to do it for anybody other than yourself. And I think that's, although we have these opportunities to share the work in social media, in this live stream, at the film festival, you don't have to share things with anybody. And in fact, sometimes it can be good just to write down how you're feeling or just really scribble and screw that piece of paper up and chuck it in the bin or flush it down the loo and, almost just get rid of some of those feelings along with the piece of paper.
That's called Gestalt therapy.
Oh, I could have invented that if only I'd lived a few decades earlier. Yes,
What's she saying about you, Julie?
well, Julie's got a degree in social psychology. She's a qualified counsellor, though it's a long, long time since she practiced. And she's also been a local authority mental health worker. And I know she won't tell us any of that, but it's one of the reasons that she's able to give us so much input as our chair.
I was
But
going to.
I wanted to just pick up the thing about survivors because it struck me when I was thinking about the subject of Mental Health Awareness Week and just the whole thing. The language that is quite familiar to us, to those of us certainly who are working in the field of disability, disabled people's movement, is the sense of people surviving the system. And that's very much what that you may or may not have survived your mental health difficulties, or you may be living with them long term, because of course plenty of people do, and that's entirely normal as well. But the system has not been a kind system, and I think you've only unfortunately got to look at all of the appalling reports that Panorama, and thank goodness for Panorama, keep producing about places like Winterbourne View, to know that whether you've got learning difficulties or no learning difficulties, if you're classified as having mental health difficulties, you will be put into institutions that are very unkind indeed and have been even more unkind in the past. So people came up with the term survivor to say, I have survived this appalling, unkind regime. And that has left me fragile as well. But again, I think it's also coming from that space of saying there's nothing abnormal about hearing voices, living with depression, living with anxiety, and a whole host of other conditions, because sometimes with this emphasis on mental health, it's like we all have to be healthy. And I don't think that's true at all. I think we just have to sort of be kind to ourselves, partly, as you were saying, with self-kindness, that expectation. We shouldn't expect ourselves to be these perfect people with a big fixed smile on our face, and we never feel anxious, we never feel fear, we never feel depression.
I think there's an important aspect of being a survivor is that you're not a victim, and I think it's in common with sexual assault and rape and a whole range of abuse, that the preferred description is survivor. And I think that's absolutely critical, and we need to be respectful of that.
I do, but the problem is it also opens up a huge chasm around, at the moment, everyone is being told, look, you may still be ill. If you need to go to hospital, you need to go to hospital. And there's so much negativity around some areas of mental health services. Obviously, there are some superb examples as well. Let's put that out there. But that people have become afraid to want to go to a mental health service one, because of the stigma that is currently attached to it, which fits into the whole idea of, us challenging what kindness is and how we can be kind. And I kind of lost my thread a bit there, sorry, but is do you want to put yourself in there? I would class myself as an escapist rather than a survivor. That where I've had my moments, my times, particularly as a teenager, an adolescent, becoming an adult as a disabled person, I had some really, really grim times. And thankfully, I was able to talk myself through it. But that's not, that is only something you can only make that judgment on yourself, and you can never expect someone else to do what you've done. But bringing this back to the art at home, later in the year we may well talk about a project that I have run called Permission to Speak. And I think that the idea of that fits in really well with this is that within the bound, accepting that self-harm and harming others isn't acceptable behavior, but that actually that you also have to be absolutely honest with yourself about how you're feeling about yourself or the situation that you're experiencing at the time, and using an art form to externalize that. As Josh said, don't internalize it. We're saying externalize those feelings in a way that that you can. If you asked me to make a film about it at the moment, that would actually frustrate me more, because filmmaking is something I know not a lot about. But actually, give me a guitar and an amplifier, and I can make tuneful, loud noises and put my emotion into bending a string. It's the same deal. And it could simply be that actually what you want to do is, get a piece of bread out of the bread bin and stamp on it. Fine. If it's making some authoritative that makes you kind of go, yes, I just needed to do that, that's okay.
I wanted to ask Josh, and also to pick up what Julie was saying earlier about trolls on the internet. On the one hand, there's a lot less digital exclusion amongst young people, so it should, in theory, be easier to reach out. But the other side of it is all of the Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, this kind of idea that you've got to look perfect on the internet, and the internet really matters. I mean, do you think it's harder for young people these days?
100, definitely. There's FOMO is the term that gets kind of thrown around, which is fear of missing out. Which is this that kind of came about as a result of social media, in that typically what you see on social media isn't somebody's real life. It's it's the parts of their life that they want to share, or it's things that are edited. And I can speak to it from experience, because I'm not kind of hugely active on social media, just because my life's fairly boring. I just go between my house and a swimming pool most of the time. I have some fairly glamorous friends, and if you look at their kind of Instagrams, it's them at parties and by the pool and on the beach and things like that. But what isn't on there is, when we go for coffee at 11 in the morning and they look like they've just got out of bed, because they have, and they don't have their makeup on, and it doesn't have on there the days when they feel rubbish and they've had an argument with their friend or their other half, or all of those things that happen to everybody, whether you're growing up in Canning Town or you're a Hollywood actor. We all have our own kind of challenges and battles and things that we have to deal with. But typically those things don't get shared on social media for, not wanting to appear weak or preachy, or whatever the reason is, that social media is a snapshot of somebody's life. It's not the true thing. I always think about there's a picture, I use it in education a lot. There's a picture of an iceberg, and the top of it might be your Instagram photo or the A star you got in your exam or whatever, and that's what people see. But what they don't see is the huge chunk of ice underneath that is anxiety and depression and hard work and everything. And I think that's the real challenge with social media.
And I'm going to say,
I
just to add to that,
Oh,
just sorry, Jodie, is it actually even the slightly younger age group than Josh, but living with the teenagers that are currently, not being able to have contact with anyone of their own age and going through puberty, I think is a huge issue waiting to become, the next kind of, a potential mental health mountain that's going to need to be climbed, because they haven't been able to share, and it's not that kind of stuff that you can put on social media without anybody jumping on it, because nothing is private.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. That unless you're actually in real life these days, it's like you can't trust anybody, can you? It's all going to be revealed. But I think for people of any age, it's like, I suppose it's almost kind of, when everything was about celebrity magazines, there was a certain kind of cohort and age group that thought everybody could and should live like Katie Price, and now everything's on the internet. It's kind of almost become younger, but for a very long time there's been this push to say you should be aspiring towards the impossible, and if you can't achieve that impossible, you must be a failure. And look, anybody can do this. It's so easy to become a millionaire. Well, I noticed Katie Price was going bankrupt. I'm not sure if it was for the first time, but even Katie Price isn't finding it easy to be Katie Price.
Yeah, I mean, there was an article that came out either on Friday or over the weekend, that they'd done some kind of financial forecasting, and that kind of by 2036 or something, that Jeff Bezos was going to become the world's first trillionaire, which is just a incomprehensible amount of money. And the kind of replies were mixed between, that is, insane. How can one person have that much money when there is, so much difficulty in the world? And then because it's social media and you get trolls, there was, that great thing. They're like, oh, well, if you worked hard, you could have that as well. And it's like, well, no, 99% of the world have worked 9 to 5 for 30, 40 years until they retire, and don't have anywhere near £1 million, let alone a trillion,
or indeed a roof over their head.
well,
And
yeah, that as
I
well.
think that's absolutely right. This kind of myth that, oh, if you do everything and throw everything at it, you can achieve your dreams. Well, I'd like to, on the one hand, say yes, of course you can, from an artistic point of view, but I think from a broader point of view, I mean, I know plenty of artists who are enormously successful, but they don't have a penny to their name. So I think also people can assume, can't they? Oh, we're always seeing so and so on TV, or so and so's never at home. They're always touring. They must be making loads of money. But actually, again, it's that iceberg. Only the tip of the iceberg is, and everybody else is working extremely hard. I think this has been such an interesting discussion. We will pick things up later in the week, but also on Wednesday, we have our virtual writer in residence and poet Penny Pepper with us. We've had some poetry sent in from Pies and Malak, and also from our associate drama company, Act Up Newham. So we'll definitely be talking poetry and mental health on Wednesday. As it's Monday, I'm going to finish in a minute with one of my, well, not quite yet, not literally in a minute, but at the end of the program, I'm going to read a poem called Eligibility Test, which I was trying to think about which of my poems was most suitable for this discussion. And it's very much a poem about being asked to do the impossible, because I think that's the only time when I really lose a sense of pride in who I am. Because if you're being told, well, you have to be able to walk to do such and such, or you have to be able to use the phone to do such and such, and it's intrinsic to you that you can't, then I think that leaves you in a very dark place, because there's nobody, if you can't do anything about the sort of barriers in society that are insisting you do the impossible, it's hard not to turn it on yourself. And I think I've yet to meet anybody who's certainly who uses adult services who doesn't have mental health challenges, and I think again that can be a real sort of double whammy. You get a label if you're disabled, don't you? Either have learning difficulties, mental health difficulties, or as they quaintly describe it, physical and sensory impairments. If you have learning difficulties, you're not allowed to have mental health difficulties. You have challenging behavior, which is then, dealt with very punitively. But I think it's impossible to be dealing with social care and social services and benefit claims and finance documents and all of the barriers we face, the sort of the lack of kindness in so many official dealings, and then not end up with mental health challenges. So I find the kind of splitting in services incredibly unhelpful. I mean, I don't know what you think in the West Midlands.
I mean, I think, so Trace and I have sat down at times and maybe we've had a moment of anxiety with each other. And then, and I mean proper anxiety. I mean, not just you forgot to empty the dishwasher kind of, if you've got one, obviously. And then we go, hold on a minute, let's look at what happened this week. We're a family of 4 people, all of whom are disabled people. Well, what happened with at the hospital? How many hospital appointments have we been with? How many times couldn't you park at the hospital? Who stared at you at the hospital? What happened when you were at the hospital? Were you on time? Were you late for the next appointment? I mean, and that could just be one afternoon. So I'm kind of bringing this back full circle, this idea of kindness and being kind to yourself and recognizing, in the very sort of occasionally claustrophobic relationships that are happening at the moment, is actually us taking stock of all those things that we encounter and keeping them outside of who you are. Because I think that is one of the massivest tools that I've discovered, or Tracy and I have discovered over the last 30 years together, and plus the 20 years more of life that we've got than that, is that idea of actually take back and say to you, if someone had looked in on you, if there was a documentary going on about your life, how many negative aspects would it pick up that you are being that are being foisted onto you on a daily basis or a weekly basis? So step back from those and find the person within.
Yes, and you'll very often discover it's not the person within that's at fault, it's the rest of the world. That can sound a little bit strange, but I think often, unfortunately, it is true. So I think it's probably almost time for some goodbyes. Shall we go over to the West Midlands first?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of super briefly before we finish, just kind of jumping on what Dad was talking about. And Julie, you might be able to kind of give more detail on this with your background, because I'm not a psychologist. But something that I've come across in my work as a sports coach that I was given by a psychologist is that, it's a triangle of our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings. In that our thoughts affect how we feel and act, how we act affects how we think and feel, and how we feel affects how we think and what we do. And I think kind of what you were talking about there is, thinking about all the things that you've dealt with that week or that day, that might have, you know, kind of, it might have been only a really small thing, but 30 small things a day can, you know, suddenly feel really heavy. And, you know, we've always talked about, you know, trying to remove yourself from your thoughts slightly and look at them kind of objectively, and then try and deal with those if you can. Obviously, it's easy to say that if you're kind of not struggling with it. But I thought that kind of triangle of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors was a really nice kind of tool to use, you know, to kind of evaluate where you are. I don't know if you want to kind of add anything more to that.
Well, it chips in really nicely. I know my name's not Julie, with Mental Health Awareness Week, which is saying if you do small acts of kindness, it benefits you too. And that, you know, you don't have to sit there in a particular mood or anything else. You know, just remember to be kind to other people and you will feel better as well. So it really is a win-win situation. I mean, we're going to come back to this all week because it is Mental Health Awareness Week. Did you want to come back on Josh's point now, Julie?
Don't underestimate how much psychology you're actually working with. Sports psychology, at least like sports physio, contributes to a greater world of knowledge, and I think it's important to recognize that things which are motivational, you know, or things which perhaps can hold us back in sport and in life, do overlap. And I think it was a very helpful reference, actually, Josh, because, you know, sort of, yeah, it's a circle. You can call it a triangle, you can call it a circle, but everything sort of impacts on everything else. And I think to be able to step aside, and Robin, you're absolutely spot on. When we step outside of ourselves and look at everything that's going on around us, it's awful sometimes, the realization of how difficult things are. I had a really kind social worker once in 1991.
Sorry to laugh.
Well,
It's just...
I think we'll move swiftly on there as it's 4 o'clock and I can hear our assistance dogs barking on record. So, shall we have some goodbyes from the West Midlands?
Yeah, it's goodbye from me in St Coldfield.
it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And finally, before goodbye from me, here is my poem Eligibility Test, which certainly, yes, reflects how my mental health definitely gets damaged by the system. I am a disabled person. I cannot use the phone. I cannot use the phone because I'm a disabled person. I must use the phone to prove I'm a disabled person, so I'm not a disabled person. I'm a disabled person. I cannot use the internet. I cannot use the internet because I'm a disabled person. I must use the internet to prove I'm a disabled person, so I'm not a disabled person. I'm a disabled person. I cannot read the forms. I cannot read the forms because I'm a disabled person. I must read the forms to prove I'm a disabled person, so I'm not a disabled person. I'm a disabled person. I cannot travel to the job centre. I cannot travel to the job centre because I'm a disabled person. I must travel to the job centre to prove I'm a disabled person, so I'm not a disabled person. Who am I? I'm a disabled person. I'm not a disabled person. I am. And I hope you all are yourselves too. Goodbye to everybody, and a special goodbye to Blake Jarrett Gibbons. We're delighted you could join us today.
Bye, guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.